Welcome everyone, today we have some news about 10.1.7, our upcoming, incoming, extra mid-season patch. For this, we are talking about balance tuning, we are talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 different specs being changed. Of the 4 changes, the first one is a positive one, but possibly useless. The second change is an alternative addition, but possibly irrelevant. The third one is a straight buff, which is likely going to go unused. And the fourth one is a straight nerf to one of the Exodia specs. So let's go over and look at what is planned to be changed in 10.1.7, starting from Resto Druid. Resto Druid is not currently a super meta spec in Mythic Plus, since we all know Holy Paladin is taking that spot. It's also a reasonably strong, but not the meta pick in the raid either. Now, of the changes they are receiving, the main change for Druid is that they are receiving 2 new talents in their talent tree, and 2 talents are going away to be replaced by these talents. So we are saying goodbye to Forest's Flow, which is the talent that buffed your Nourish to be able to extend the duration of your HOTS, mostly because no Druid, whether or not you were playing Mythic Plus or Raid, was actually taking Nourish. So Blizzard was like, okay, fine, you don't like Nourish, let's try to give you something else in that spot. The other talent going away is Deep Focus. Deep Focus was the alternative choice to Circle of Life and Death. Circle of Life and Death buffed your dots on, as many targets as you wanted, so it was good in AoE, while Deep Focus was your single target talent, to do more damage on a single target with your dots, and to more healing with your HOTS. Blizzard, once more, realized nobody is taking Deep Focus, so let's get rid of this talent for some alternative options. These are the spots in your talent tree where these choice nodes were placed. The replacements. Replacement number 1 over to the Deep Focus talent is gonna be Master Shapeshifter. TLDR, now as a Resto Druid you can get bonuses once you shapeshift into a different form and use one of their staple abilities. For Bear form you have Iron Fur to give you more armor and more mana. For Monk form you have the main balanced Druid damaging abilities to give you more damage and more mana, and then for Cat form same thing, more damage with the Cat form abilities and more mana. Now this is all rather good as an extra utility effect and more healing in the sense that you get more mana. It's of course not a particularly strong damage talent, certainly not more than Circle of Life and Death for AoE situations where Druid is already using Circle of Life and Death, but as I said, for mana it's definitely the better choice. During periods of low damage, for example, in the raid, you can shift over to Monk form, start spamming Wrath and gaining a whole bunch of mana back, which is, valuable. Defensiveness-wise, it's decent because in Bear form you can now get more armor with Iron Fur, which can be somewhat worth. The mana gain on Iron Fur is quite bad because you can spam Iron Fur for nearly as long and nearly as much as, for example, spamming Wrath in Monk form, but still, it's a good addition for utility if you weren't as focused as doing damage down the left side of the tree for Resto Druid. The other option that is being added to Resto is Grove Guardians. So this is an alternative way to allow you to use Nourish. Basically now you have another talent where you can spawn 3 ends, except this 3 end you are spawning with Grove Guardians is going to instantly cast Swiftmend on your target when it spawns, so you have an extra cast of Swiftmend basically with this talent, and then for 15 seconds after it's going to be targeting a nearby ally with Nourish and use Nourish. The power-up, the follow-up talent of this new talent is going to be Wild Synthesis, which already exists for Druid, but now has the addition of Grove Guardians. The addition of Wild Synthesis makes it so that now the Grove Guardians can also cast Wild Growth when summoned, instead of just Swiftmend. So this makes it also much better in the party, but also in the raid. So it's basically an alternative where Blizzard gives up on trying to have Resto Druids use Nourish. Instead, they gave them something completely different, like spawning an extra ad to give more healing. It might be good in certain situations, like for example heavy movement, or for example passive healing. For example, you want to continue doing damage as a Resto Druid, pull out your Grove Guardians, your multiple Grove Guardians, while you do damage. And they will provide some extra passive healing on top of all of the passive healing you already have as a Resto Druid because of your HOTS that you can put down before you shapeshift and go and do some damage. Those are the main changes for Resto. In addition, all of their healing, although, is also getting reduced by 2%, so maybe Blizzard is predicting this extra addition of talents to be quite strong. That's for now the plan changes in 10.1.7 for Resto. As I said, they are good changes, possibly useful, but maybe are going to end up being unused because at the end of the day, these talents that they are replacing are already not used because there are stronger talents that Druids are already going for. So unless these talents prove to be much stronger, it's likely they will continue to be not really taken. Then we have Monk. This time Monk gets to change something that the Mistweaver is already using, which is their mana tea. No, not this mana tea, this actual drink they are drinking. Now, the change going from the old version of Monk to the new version of Monk is like this. You can see the left side of the tree loses a talent, which is Spirit of the Crane, the one that gives you mana back passively when you use Blackout Kick. There is also a switch of talents down the right side. Invigorating Mists goes up one tier, from tier 3 to tier 4 in your talent rows, and is replaced in its previous position by Mana Tea. Mana Tea used to be far lower down, far deeper down your tree. Now the place of Mana Tea has been taken by the new talent Energizing Brew to further buff Mana Tea. The change to Mana Tea is that it goes from being a simple one-time click talent of reducing the mana cost of your abilities by 50% for 10 seconds on a 90-second cooldown to something quite different. Now you gain stacks of Mana Tea every 25,000 mana you spend, and every time you gain a stack, you have a chance to gain an extra free stack based on your crit, which is a very good addition because it gives more value to your crit. This is very good for scaling, to have your secondary stats be tied to the power of some talents to make them stronger the more gear you have, and then you can consume the stacks of Mana Tea you have to gain mana over time, and at the end of this channel, at the end of you drinking the tea, you gain 50% mana cost reduction for however many stacks you had of Mana Tea, 1 second per stack. This overall nets to be a buff. You will be able to gain, essentially to keep more mana, to save more mana than the previous version of Mana Tea, which gave you a 50% mana discount over 10 seconds. This one can be stronger. It can also be stronger because it has no cooldown. You can choose when to use Mana Tea. You can use Mana Tea for 5 stacks. You can use Mana Tea for 7 stacks, for 9 stacks. You're not tied to a long 90-second cooldown once in a while. This one is much more varied in the ways you can use Mana Tea. Of course, it has the annoyance that it's channeled. It has the annoyance that it's not really fitting that well with the fist weaving style of Mistweaver. It also kind of counters the current playstyle of monks. At the moment, monks are playing with Yulon and the cooldown reduction to make it 1 minute cooldown Yulon. And then you pop Yulon, you use 5 enveloping mists, you use your rising sun kick, your clouds and whatnot. And then after you popped that combo, you use Mana Tea and spam Vivify. With this change, with Mana Tea being channeled, it would have to be used first before the entire thing happened because of your rapid diffusion buff only lasting 6 seconds. It becomes a little bit more clunky to use, but the idea in general of this change for Mistweaver is positive. It is definitely a bit weird to see them pushing a bit more towards the caster style of Monk and removing some of the pieces that the Mistweaver Monk was already using. For the last 2 specs that are being changed are just one line of text, just one change. The first one is to Holy Paladin, and it's a buff to Tower of Radiance. Tower of Radiance is the talent that gave you back 1 holy power when you casted Flash of Light and Holy Light on targets with Beacon, or a chance of gaining 1 talent when you were casting Flash of Light or Holy Lights on target without Beacon, with the chance increasing the less health they had. Now, it's just straight up, Flash of Light and Holy Light always generate 1 holy power when you cast them. which is a buff, you know, it's just a straight up buff. Now, the talent was never used by Holy Paladins, likely why this talent is being buffed. The question, of course, is Holy Paladin is the strongest healer in the game, so why do we see 10.1.7 changes starting off with buffs to Holy Paladin? That's the main question mark about this change for Holy Paladin. The last one is the nerf, which is also the biggest nerf of today, and as I mentioned goes to one of the Exodia specs because it's Priest, but in particular Shadow Priest. This is angled more at Mythic Plus. Why? Angel's Mercy, the talent which used, or at the moment still, reduces the cooldown of Desperate Prayer based on the amount of damage you are taking, now has a flat cooldown reduction of 20 seconds. TLDR, your Desperate Prayer max HP defensive cooldown goes from 90 second cooldown to 70 second cooldown, period. No other cooldown reduction possible. This is a problem for Priest because with the amount of damage you were taking, you could reduce this cooldown by a massive amount, even upwards of a 1 minute cooldown reduction from 90 second cooldown to 30 second cooldown. This, for example, is a key in Mythic Plus. It's an Underrot plus 30. Of course, it's a Shadow Priest because Discipline and Holy Priest can't enter a plus 30 key, but in this plus 30 you can see that the Shadow Priest is using Desperate Prayer at 28:10 seconds, and then it's using another Desperate Prayer at 28:40, just 30 seconds later. And even after it used the second Desperate Prayer at 28:40, it can use the third Desperate Prayer at 29:35. So basically he got a 50 and a 40 second cooldown reduction between the uses. Now, with this new talent, he would have only gotten a 20 second cooldown reduction in between each use. This is the main change which is going to hit the defensiveness of a Priest quite heavily. It's gonna be worth more very often in Mythic Plus, especially on tyrannical weeks of Mythic Plus because of the heavy damage you are taking, but also in the raid. Also in the raid on heavy continuous damage fights, like for example Magmorax is a pretty heavy continuous damage boss where this talent would have a lot of value for even the squishier side of Priest, which is the healer one. Holy and Discipline are also receiving a pretty decent nerf to their defensiveness with this talent change. So, with these 4 specs being changed so far in 10.1.7, we have a decent possible utility change for Restoration Druid, something that effectively, just looking at the numbers, it's a buff for the mana regen of Mistweaver Monk, but doesn't fit quite well with their playstyle. A straight up buff to Holy Paladin, a spec that didn't really need any buffs, although the talent itself was quite weak, so kind of 50-50 on how you see that. And then the last one is the nerf to Priest, which is good on the side of Shadow Priest for being too strong and kind of bad on the side of the 2 healers, which were already amongst the squishier of the healers, now getting even more squishy with this change. So these are the changes for now planned for 10.1.7, which is a patch that might come out in the next few weeks. My prediction would be 3 weeks from now, maybe a month in total. Maybe a month is a bit too late, but you know, in the next following weeks this patch should come out, and these were the balance tuning changes we have received so far. With this out of the way, it's time to leave each other for today as well. We are thanking, of course, as usual, all of the patron supporters for the contribution and the help as usual to the growth of the channel, which you can still do for free. You can still like and comment down below to help with the YouTube algorithm, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. For today, on this flowery outfit edition, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I'm still confused. I am still confused about that Holy Paladin change. That's the first thing that came to your mind when looking at Holy Paladin? Really?